So today we're doing Natasha Denona. I'm actually going to do this one a little bit differently. I'm going to start with the worst and end with the best. And obviously this is just my own opinion. And you know, it could change slightly, the actual number of things, but suffice to say, this is just my collection and my experience with the palettes that I own. This is not in order, but I just wanted to put something on the screen so it wasn't just me talking. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the Natasha Denona video today and then take a break and do a talking video or one with me on screen, because frankly I find those more interesting myself. So I don't know, I think maybe we'll talk about the Ulta sale briefly. I don't, you know, it'll be short, but just to break it up a little bit. And then I'll go on to cataloging some of my other palettes. I might do the indie shadows next because frankly, I think they're more interesting. I was gonna include Viseart, but when I started collecting images, I realized that it's just too many palettes and I had like 60 photos, which would take me like 12 hours to edit. So I think I'm only gonna do photos for the most interesting palettes, and then when I move on into blush and bronzer and that kind of thing, I think I'll just leave the photos out and maybe do some live swatches, and it'll be more interesting video that way. But anyway, without taking up too much more time, I'll get right into it. So this is my Natasha Denona ranking video, starting with my least favorite palette. I will be including minis for this. So yeah, okay, let's start. This is my least favorite palette by far. This was a special holiday release a couple years back, and honestly, I just thought the palette itself looked cool. It has really pretty packaging. It came with a matching brush that I thought was adorable, and you know, at this point, I had a bunch of her minis, and I love them. I love the formula in her mini palettes. So I figured this would be just like those. But the formula is actually terrible. They look creamy, but they're dry, they're powdery, and these are just not tones that are flattering on me at all. The prettiest shade is this one, and I don't know, I don't reach for this enough that it's worth having this whole thing for just that one sort of unique shade. Yeah, this was a mistake, but not very expensive. So this one, I bought the Sunset palette. I bought solely because it was on sale. And up until this point, I had a pretty small Natasha Denona collection. I think this palette was at least 50% off, and that's the entire reason that I purchased it. I wanted to get a feel for her full-size palettes, and this is the only full-size palette I have by her. You know, and it just comes down to the shades. You know, I had heard that there was differences in formulas between the size of palettes, and that's what led me to see if this was a formula I liked better. I think my first ever Natasha Denona palette was the Glam palette, so I wanted to compare that, you know, in formula and see if I like this better, and I don't. You know, this is probably my favorite shade, and it's nice and creamy and pigmented and shiny. So I guess I did like the formula better in this, but at the end of the day, I don't like the shades. And I thought the mattes were a little, I don't want to say not pigmented, but they didn't blend seamlessly. And because of that, and then on top of it, not liking the shades, this was just more of an experimental, you know, it was valuable to me insofar that I got to experience it, but when it comes to use, I never really use this palette and like what I come out with. So after trying for a while, I finally gave up, and I just don't like this palette. So that's that. Editing Jean here, I wanted to add that unlike a lot of brands, I actually don't have all of the palettes that I would like from Natasha Denona. I really think if I had the gold palette, I would feel so differently. You know, that's a full-size palette that had a color story that I'm pretty sure I would have loved. But not enough that I would go out of my way to try to, well, sometimes they restock, but it's not one that I would spend hundreds of dollars to either buy when it's restocked or get on Mercari or anything like that, because I just think I have more modern shades that replace the need for that. But I didn't want to sound like, you know, I have all of the palettes by her that I would rank. You know, I'm sure that if I had some of her other full-size palettes, I would feel a lot differently, just because I don't like this particular one. I just wanted to throw that out there. This was another sale purchase, the Dark Glam Face palette. I purchased this, I think this was 50% off, and I love the formula in these eyeshadows. I don't know what it is, and I've never seen it since, but the formula for the shimmers is just beyond stunning. It is my favorite that she has ever done, ever, period. So I figured, even though these were a little deep for me, it was worth having just to have shimmers in that formula. And I guess that could be true, but just all together, it's not a flattering look on my fair skin. I wanted to be better about reaching for this in combination with other palettes than I have been. The reality is I don't utilize it. I don't mix it with lighter palettes. And I really want to work on doing that a little bit more and trying to get more use out of it, but these don't have the same effects on me, so it didn't work out to be a useful palette. Then I have another mini. This is the Mini Retro. A lot of people love this palette, so much so that they came out with a midi. I just think it's okay. It didn't blow my mind. I like this shade, but I have this shade a few times over now. And while I like the look that I do when I use this palette, I don't like it on myself enough to warrant ever expanding. You know, this was enough for me. I wanted this so I could play with it and see if I liked it on, you know, on my skin tone. But all it did was sort of convince me not to buy the bigger version because this was enough for me. I don't really like the direction that one went in. And yeah, I think this all comes down to skin tone, because formula-wise, these are great. All of the minis from this point on are good. Then I bought another sale item, the Chroma Crystals. These were discontinued, so, you know, they were incredibly cheap. I will say, I think this was the prerequisite to what she's coming out with now. So it's a nice top coat, but I think the new version is better anyway. So if you didn't get your hands on these, I don't think you missed out. right, then we have Glam. This palette, while I'm happy to have it because the tones are quite useful, this is what made me think that I just didn't like Natasha Denona, period, end of story. When I bought this palette, I thought I was doing something wrong, quite frankly, because everybody and their mother loved this palette, and I hate this palette. It makes me feel sad when I use this palette because there's no really bright, sparkly shades that's, at least at this point in my makeup life, that's what makes me happy. To have a really bright inner corner, a really shimmery, light look, nothing, I consider the makeup that I do on a daily basis to be pretty everyday friendly, but I still like there to be a little bit of sparkle. And this just lacked. The lightest shades in here, they're easy to use, but they're very satin. And, that's how it's described. I mean, nobody sold this palette as being over the top in terms of fun. But they, for a lot of people, it is a workhorse. It's a very useful everyday palette. And between the shimmers not performing to my standard and the mattes being just, kind of chalky, like patchy, chalky, I guess grippy would be a better word. These mattes made me think that I really just didn't like her matte formula. And, after having this palette, I was a lot more reserved and I didn't jump on every new release because I thought they were all gonna be like this one. And luckily, there have been changes since. And while I wanna give this palette respect for the color story, because I do really, really like that, I just don't like this palette. I'm glad that things have changed since because this was a turning point for me. And I'm glad the newer palettes are more exciting than this one. Then we have Mini Dream. So this is a pretty mini. It does not remind me of my dream palette. It just doesn't. But I always snap these minis up because I find them so useful. I like the shimmer formula in these, and they're great for travel. I feel like I get a outer corner, inner corner, a whole look. They're curated so well for that, I don't care if this doesn't remind me of the palette. It's neutral, it's basic, it's useful, it's a solid one. It's not one that I would miss if I lost it, unfortunately, but it's a nice little palette. Okay, now we have Mini Biba. This is just nice. This has the wet dry formula in it, and I like that color, but I'm not a cream shadow person, so that's just not a formula of hers that I like. At the end of the day, I really don't. But this shimmer is very impactful, so that's why this rate's so high. To me, this isn't as much of a one and done because there's not really the variety that I look for, but I love this shade so much that, it makes me really happy to have this palette. Okay, next we have Xenon. Very controversial palette right here. You either love it or you hate it. or you're like me and you're like, it's just okay. I'm happy to have this. At the end of the day, I do one look with it that I like. I can do multiple looks, but after trying for as long as I have, you know, my eye shape and what I find flattering on myself is what limits this palette. It's not necessarily the palette alone, because I think you could probably, if you do halo eyes and you do multiple eye looks, there are several, or at least 4 or 5 that you could come out with this palette. Not the most diverse, but not, you know, it's not 2 looks only. It's 2 looks only for me though. So for that reason, it ranks where it does. I like these like more topper shimmers. But again, they're not unique enough that, you know, I don't feel like I would be at a loss necessarily if I lost this palette, but I don't regret that I bought it either. So we're starting to turn the corner, but we're not quite in the palettes that I would run out and replace just yet. So that is Xenon. Then we have this, what is this? The Mini Nude. Workhorse. I don't travel without this palette ever. It is exactly what it says. You know, I do wish that this matte was lighter. That would be more useful to me, but this is a good crease shade. And these, yeah, I would replace this. This I don't use, but these 2 are just really, they're really pretty. They're really pretty, inner corner and all over the lid shades. This has just over time proven to be an extremely useful palette, and I think it's a crowd pleaser. I think most people would appreciate having this palette. You know, this maybe it leans a little more warm than I would really prefer on a daily basis, but regardless, as far as these mini palettes go, this is definitely one that I would run out and get again if I lost it. Next, we have the Mini Starlet. One of the most recent, if not the most recent, mini palette from her. At first glance, I wouldn't have thought that this would be my favorite mini palette, but it just is so flattering. This tone on my fair neutral skin, I didn't know how much I liked that shade until I bought this palette. I really just bought it because it was there and I knew that I would use it because I use all of my minis, you know, the recent ones anyway. And I just knew that it was gonna be something that I would use no matter what. It doesn't contain everything that I look for. You know, this shade wouldn't have been my first choice. This shade isn't my first choice, but altogether, the look that I make with this palette is one that I really like on myself. And again, I give her credit because she curated this and knew, you know, these were colors that worked for me that I didn't even know worked for me. So that is a testament to her talent as an artist in putting colors together. And, you know, it doesn't always work out for me, but that's the beauty of humanity and the fact that we're all different. And this just happened to be one that I really love. Okay, now the next 2 are my top 2 palettes. And I struggled to put one in front of the other because one of these palettes I use literally every single day. Well, no, not every day, almost every day. And the other one is just a palette that I find irreplaceable. So that's why they're ranked the way they are. The I Need a Nude is by far my most used palette across all palettes. So I use this palette more than any other palette from any brand because I use it to set up most of my looks. You know, I have matte palettes. I don't really ever do an all matte look, but I have matte palettes that I used to reach for to set up looks for other palettes. So tones that I just found flattering on me that set the groundwork for, you know, other shadows. I don't know what it is about this, but when this came along, I stopped using those. So like my Viseart matte palette, or, you know, just other mattes that are Makeup by Mario matte palette. I just stopped using those because I found these more flattering. I like setting my primer with this, and then I use these two to set up my crease, and then I do my outer corner. And it's a gray tone brown, so maybe that's why I want the new Makeup by Mario palette, because that has, you know, they call it 90s tones, but it's like a mix between warm and cool. So it's less orange. I hate orange. I don't like, you know, bronzers that lean orange, foundation that leans yellow or orange. I'm very neutral leaning cool. So I think gray, for example, is a flattering color on me. So that's probably why this was such a home run. And I didn't necessarily expect it to be that way, but this is a great palette for that. I also like the shimmer formula. So if I'm gonna travel and this is the only shimmer I have, that's all I need, you know? It's hard to see, but I have swatches. It's very impactful, which is all I look for. That's all I want in a shimmer. That being said, when I use this palette, I almost never use the shimmers. So I don't know what that says about the formula, but you know, even this, like these toppers, they're beautiful, but they're very light, they're very subtle. I like that though. As long as the shimmer is impactful, I appreciate the subtle but super shimmery look. I love toppers in general. But really since getting Glaminatrix, I think that's what did it. I think since I got Glaminatrix, especially the singles that I got, I can't use these over those. You know, I have a version of like a Glaminatrix version of this color. I'm gonna reach for that one every time. That's just how it is. I mean, this palette for me was a turning point in that I like her palettes now because the shimmers are impactful. But so far they're better, but they're not quite my ideal yet. But we're moving in the right direction. And no matter what, until I get something else that I use on a daily basis, this is my favorite everyday palette overall. Okay, now is my number one. This is the palette that I can't live without because of the shimmer formulas. When I was on my honeymoon, this was all I used the entire time. I don't know, yeah. Try to get myself out of the frame. It's this shimmer that's just called Inner Corner. Whatever the heck formula this is, I've never seen it outside of this palette. After this came out, I was holding my breath, and every time there was a new release, I was like, maybe this one, maybe this has this formula in it. But for whatever reason, I think it only exists in this one palette. You know, that being said, if I were to lose all of my makeup and I was literally starting from scratch. I didn't have a single piece of eyeshadow. This would be the first palette that I would buy. Before the minis, before anything from even Pat McGrath, who's my favorite artist, even Glaminatrix, because the shipping is so much, and you know, I don't need their mattes. I really go to them for the shimmers. This would be the palette that I would buy first. You know, these are just really, really flattering. And then this shimmer, like, my God, it is just gorgeous. Yeah, it's just stunning. And, you know, people talk about the, you know, the blush drying out and this not being the best formula for the highlighter. I don't even care. I agree, they're not my favorite, but let me tell you, when I was in Europe, I used them and I was happy. I thought they were, you know, this is a flattering color on me, and, you know, this is perfectly adequate, especially, you know, when you're traveling and you want to look your best, but you also don't want to spend 12 hours trying to curate a look. This is just perfect. I have not bought a backup yet, but I do keep an eye out, and every year during the Sephora 20% off sale, I almost do, and one of these days I probably will, because you know, this was supposed to be limited edition, and I think this is the only palette that it would be worth having a backup, just because I love it that much. I don't love the outside case because it's filthy and it looks really beat up, but I just love it. This is my favorite Natasha Denona eyeshadow palette. If you sat through all of this, I appreciate you. I apologize for my voice. I'm a little bit under the weather today, but I am really trying to get the hang of editing with picture inserts, because I do think that is a lot more useful than just talking about the palettes with no swatches. So I did want to just film this and get it out so that I could edit it and start creating this series, and hopefully at the very end of all of it, I'll be able to do a full face of all of my favorites in every category that could be useful, at least for somebody who is, you know, over 40 with super dry skin and, you know, all the concerns that go along with that. You know, or just anybody who's trying to save a buck and only spend money on things that are worth it. I have such a huge collection because it's trial and error, and it's like that no matter what, I think, for every individual. But that's my goal, just to talk about what I've got and maybe save somebody time and money. Anyway, I hope you're having a beautiful evening, and I look forward to talking to you soon.